Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. My name is Madeline No. I'm with NetHope, and I want to welcome you to a Data Governance Toolkit for your nonprofit session today. We're welcoming representatives from Plan International, SOS Children's Villages, and of course, NetHope today. We're excited to have a representative from NetHope speaking. But before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping guidelines for the session today. Please keep this interactive. Post any comments or questions you have in the chat window during the session, and we'll have a Q&A a discussion session toward the end of the hour. Also, later today or tomorrow, please look for a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording for this session and any materials or other resources that are mentioned during the session today. And we also appreciate your feedback. It makes our webinar series better. So please take a moment to complete our webinar satisfaction survey that will be presented after the webinar today. And with that, I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Morgan Bradley, NetHope's Digital and Data Manager, and she will introduce her colleagues for the session today. Morgan?
Thanks, Madeline. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Bradley. As Madeline mentioned, I'm the Digital and Data Manager. So within NetHope, I look after the enterprise architecture and the data architecture for NetHope. I also lead the Data and Applications Working Group, as well as co-lead the Data and Analytics Workstream, along with my colleagues Mitch and Abby, who are with me today on the call. So Mitch is actually, she is in Plan, used to be in Plan. She's now in Diabetes Canada. But when we wrote this toolkit together, Mitch was part of Plan, which is why Plan is featured as being an organization that wrote this particular toolkit. Abby is also from SOS Children's Villages, and we will introduce ourselves a little bit more in depth afterwards, but yeah, both of them are co-leads with me, and we're very happy to be with you today to talk about Data Governance Toolkit. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. So, oh, okay, interesting. There we go. All right, there we go. So I'm going to hand it over to Mitch, if you want to go first and introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Morgan. So yeah, Mitch Sinclair. I'm now with Diabetes Canada. I was with Plan International for about 1.5 years when we started the development of the Data Governance Toolkit. I'm currently manager of the Data and Analytics area within Diabetes Canada, and I have I'll just say well over 25 years of data experience and data governance. Previous to non-for-profit was actually financial institutions and insurance, as well as credit. So lots of different type of experience, and just, well, generally very excited to be here today and present the Data Governance Toolkit.
Wonderful. Abby, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Abhijit Balakrishnan. I work with SOS Children's Villages International. I help with the enterprise architecture and the business intelligence side of our vertical. And prior to SOS Children's Villages International, I was working with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And I'm very happy to be here, and I hope we have a really good interactive webinar.
Wonderful. All right, so moving on to what we're going to be discussing today. So this is just a table of content. I'm briefly going to go over the different sections. So we're going to first start out with, why is data governance important? Basically, why are we here and why are we so interested in this topic? We'll then move into the actual purpose of the toolkit, followed by an in-depth look at each of the sections that reside within the toolkit, which are laying the foundation, writing your policy, implementation, and then post-implementation. We're also going to take a look at the resources, and then we're going to take a look at the next steps. So I'm going to hand it over to Mitch.
Hi, thanks again. So I think the folks on the call probably know why data governance is important. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be on this call. But I mean, what we're trying to do here is we recognize that a lot of people are trying to implement data governance program into their organization, and it's sometimes hard to know just where to get started. A lot of people have attended different types of webinars, just like this one. They've had some training, they've had some experience, and it's really trying to figure out, like, where do I get started? What type of policies do I need to write? What type of data governance am I going to, add to my organization? Because there's, a non-for-profit doesn't necessarily need a chief data office, but at the same time, you need the same types of disciplines and the practices and the processes that any other organization want to put in. We know that data governance will, provide those efficiencies and processes that we apply on our day-to-day jobs, and it'll increase productivity when you know that the quality is good and that we know and trust the data, and we know who's accessing it, and we know where it's being shared. We know that those things are really important, but how do we get that? And so today, what we're going to do is, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, but is why did we create this toolkit? Because we want to help you to work with your stakeholders, which are everyone in the organization, to get that buy-in that data governance is important, and putting these foundational pieces are how we're going to be successful. It's talking about how do we get the organization to start thinking about data as an asset. We hear that a lot, but how does that really work? And so these are going to be some of those steps that's going to help you to get to that. And we're going to talk about the change in the culture and from an organizational perspective, and how do we get everyone, not just our senior leadership team, on side, because they're usually the first ones to say, yeah, let's get data governance in here. But you got to talk to everyone in the organization and have them understand why is it important that when they capture data, that it has to be of good qualities, because we need to trust it, because down the road it's going to get used and it's going to get shared, and it's all that great big cycle thing. So how do we get to all of that? So that's why data governance is important, and I hope that the tools that we're going to provide you with today are going to help you not only sell that story, but or tell that story, but also how to implement it, and how to set up your foundation and your plan to implement this program. So if we move on to the next slide, and we talk a little bit more about the purpose of the toolkit. I've talked a little bit about it already, but really it's again to help you think about what's the foundational piece that I need to put in, what processes, resources, technology do I need to consider. And from a non-for-profit, we know that it's not about setting up that chief data office. It's not about having a whole big organization, because let's face it, a lot of the non-for-profits just don't have that financial ability to do that. So what we need to think about is, from an adaptive perspective and a non-invasive perspective, how do we implement data governance? And Abby and I worked over a year on trying to get this out there for you. And there were a couple of other people that helped us as well. And Abby will go into some of the background on how we got there. But when we studied a lot of the different non-for-profits and some of the data management book of knowledge and other organizations, what did they put in? What we've tried to do today is provide you with that toolkit and some templates and some best practices and guidelines that you can take back to your organization and implement. So that's what we're going to talk through today. So I'll pass it over to Abby, because I think you're going to talk about the science behind the templates.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitch. Now that we have some context on why data governance is important and why we came together to create a data governance policy template and a toolkit, I'd like to probably shed some light on how we got to this toolkit. In the initiation phase of this work stream, we realized that having a document repository of existing data governance policy within the nonprofit sector adds a lot of value. This gives members a viewpoint on how other nonprofit organizations draw out their data governance policies. So as a first step, we tried to source publicly available data governance policies and also data governance policies shared within within NetHope. And we also brought in existing data governance literature like DMBOK, like Mitch said. And this then became our baseline for all our analysis and correlations. We split the data governance policy into three crucial steps, or three crucial components, which is the people, process, and technology. The people component of this template hosts information about the operating model of your organization, the organizational hierarchy that your organization implements, and has information about roles and responsibilities that are required to implement data governance and their descriptions. The process component encapsulates the minimum set of business processes that are required to enforce data governance. And the technology component has information about the enterprise architecture frameworks that organizations use in technology and technology artifacts that every organization uses to deliver value and implement its mandate. In the course of starting this entire project, we realized that there is a lot of content that has to be sourced, aggregated, analyzed. So we had a project plan. We had milestones implemented, and we used Asana as a project management tool to draw out our deliverables. So Morgan, if you could, yes, thank you. So we were able to source and group all of the content within these data governance policies and also the literature that we had into sizable chunks. And when we were then later on going to aggregate this information, we were best suited to do it optimally. In our initial discussions, we realized that the technology part of the data governance policy is uniquely diverse. Understandably so, because each organization implements technology in a unique way as per their organization's mandate and the values that they deliver. And we realized that trying to draw intelligent correlations in the technology aspect of the data governance policy does not bring so much value. However, the people component and the process component, I'm happy to say that we had a lot of success in grouping and aggregating and analyzing the policies with the literature that we had. So Morgan, if you could go to the next slide, thank you. In our approach of analyzing these data governance policies, we analyzed each component in parallel with each other component with the literature review. And I'm very happy to say that there has been interesting correlations. And the objective here was not to have a complicated string analysis process, but our objective was to try and find if these data governance policies have the same semantics, and do they mean the same when they talk about stewardship, when they talk about business data owners. And I'm happy to say that we were able to curate descriptions, and we were able to narrow down some of these roles with the help of word tagging and semantics. In this entire course of drafting a data governance policy, we soon realized that there is a lot of preparatory work that has to be in place before you start writing your data governance policy. And soon we started to see a scope creep. We started off with a policy template that says, yes, okay, let's just start writing a data governance template, and then let's just hand it through. And then we started to realize the complexity of trying to get the policy in place and what kind of preparation you need to truly implement data governance in your organization. And that is how we delivered this artifact. This artifact was born because data governance is not just about one policy, but it's a sequence of steps and a sequence of activities that organizations have to carry. And to help you in this journey, we created the Data Governance Toolkit. And to know more about the Data Governance Toolkit, I'm going to hand it to Morgan.
Thanks so much, Abby. And this is where we have arrived. So exactly what Abby was saying, it's not just about writing the policy, it's every step of the way before you write the policy, but also after. So these are the four main, let's say, sections that we have identified when you go along this journey to data governance. We will go in depth into each one of these. I'm just going to go over them briefly to give you an idea. The first one is laying the foundation, which has a strong emphasis on the data governance framework and all the prep work, all the things that you have to think about and do assessments, and that's really laying the foundation in order to set yourself up for success. And once you've done that, then you move into the actual writing of the policy itself, which is still broken up into the people, process, and technology, which is important. Then you go to the actual implementation of it. So now that you've laid down the foundation, you've written it, now you actually have to put it into practice. And within that, you can, we've developed actually quite a few resources for you to use, which includes, managing your stakeholders, a communication plan, and we'll talk more about that. And then post-implementation, because once you've implemented it, it doesn't stop. It is a cyclical process. So you go back and you reiterate and you look back at your KPIs, and you go back into that cycle. So that's really what we've been able to develop. And I'm going to hand it over to Mitch now to talk to us about the first section.
Thanks again. So yeah, Abby is absolutely right. When we started this work well over a year ago, we thought, okay, we're going to just create a data governance policy. Then we started talking about, well, in order to really implement a data governance policy, you need to know what your data strategy is, or at least know what your needs assessment is, because within the policy, we started talking about, well, there's pieces about access and sharing, data retention, data quality, data privacy. There were all these different components. And as we started getting more into each of those sections, and you'll see that in the template, we thought, well, how do we even know what's important, and what do we actually include in our policy now, and how will people know? And so things did morph. And so what we thought was, well, we'll create this framework for people. So if you're past the framework, if you already have the strategy in place and you just need the policy, you're lucky. We've got a template that you can use. But if you need to kind of step back and really start thinking about that foundation and thinking, what do I really need to do? Here's some ideas and some guidelines for you. So a data strategy would be great, but it's a hard thing to accomplish, because it does take a long time to analyze and to figure out and to develop and get the buy-in. So it's something that we recognize that you can kind of do at the same time. It's better to do it ahead of time, but sometimes you already know what the gaps are. You already know what you need. So building out a needs assessment would also help you, because what that'll do is, as you have your interviews and your discussions and remember, you always have to include your business group. This is not just about IT. This is business and IT working together to come up with a solution that'll move your organization forward, that'll build your constituent base, that'll get you the data that you need to make the right decisions. And if it's donor driven, or if it's about child safeguarding, you have to work together. So what are the gaps between the business and the IT? Is it resources? Is it, I don't understand data, I don't have the reports, I don't have a cloud environment, I don't have that warehouse. So what is it that the business needs that IT can solve with you together? And now you start developing that roadmap, and you have to think about, and we'll get into some of the racy, but now you need to think about not only the technology piece, you need to also start thinking about, well, the resources that'll support that. So this is what starts to build that roadmap, your data strategy. And you can start, as you start developing that, you can start thinking about what are some of the quick wins that we can do from a data governance perspective. And that goes back to my earlier comment where I talked about adaptive and non-invasive. So there are some things that you'll need to address immediately. And you don't need a data strategy to tell you that I need to start figuring out my data retention. I need to start figuring out my third-party data sharing and those types of rules. Those are things that you can do without a data strategy. You just know they need to be done. So how robust or how lean you make your data governance policy is up to your organization. But the important thing is lay that foundation, put it out as a project almost. But at the end of the day, data governance is a program. And it's, to your point, Morgan, it's iterative, it's cyclical. We'll start with baby steps, lay that foundation, and in a year from now, you review it and you start building on that. Data governance isn't built in a day. It takes a couple of years to do that. And then it becomes almost a business as usual. But it's a program, and that's something else that's very important. So that's the data foundation piece. The next piece is really about writing that data governance policy. So I kind of touched a little bit about that. And what you'll find in the template is we try to be as complete as possible, so that your organization can either use the whole template and you'll see things like, again, access sharing, data privacy, data retention, all those different components. It'll talk about the people that are needed to come to support that, who's going to be responsible, who's going to be accountable, who's going to be informed, right? Your typical RACI. It also talks about the process. So do I need standards? Do I need guidelines? That's what the data governance policy is going to do, is going to tell you we need these different things. And then though it's technology agnostic, it does talk about the considerations that you have to put into place. Do you need a tool for data cataloging? Do you need something for cybersecurity, for data security? Those types of things that you'll have to consider. So when you look at the policy, take out what you need, use it, or use the whole thing. And when we walk through it, we'll go through it quickly because you'll go into it, for each organization will go into it in depth themselves. But we hope that the outlines that we've provided in the policy will also help you to kind of move forward a little bit faster, as opposed to trying to figure out what do I put in each section. So that's what we did on the policy side. The next piece is up for Abby to talk about a little bit more about the implementation piece. I'll pass it over back to you, Abby.
Thank you, Mitch. Now that we have an idea of how to lay the foundation of data governance, implementation of data governance is not just a policy document that you draft and you say, okay, I'm done. This is it. My organization has a data governance policy. But to truly implement data governance, there are multiple steps that have to be in place. And some of the most important aspects of implementation of data governance is to identify those business processes within your organization that help with data governance, and identify the roles that you have in your organization. And this is one common observation, is that, I might not have a business data owner, but there are people wearing that cap who's doing a similar function. So in your organization, if you're able to group resources that have this function, this is also a good starting point. The objective of having a RACI matrix where you blow out the business processes required for data governance and the roles in your organization, you can then identify the stakeholders who are responsible for data artifacts, accountable for data artifacts. Who are the stakeholders who will be consulted and informed? And this is a very important piece, because if you have an incident in your organization, with this artifact, you are directly able to reach out to the stakeholders who are actually responsible to manage the artifact, reach out to stakeholders who should be consulted while dealing and mitigating this incident, and reaching out to stakeholders who should be informed about and incident management. This is just one example. A RACI matrix like this has a multifaceted functionality, not just with data governance. And this is an asset to any organization. And if organizations have an enterprise architecture framework that they use to evaluate technologies that are sunsetting or technologies that are emerging to replace existing technologies in your organization, the objective is to embrace data governance as a day-to-day activity. If you look at data governance as something periodic that we say, okay, in 3 months, we will look at data governance again, then there is a lot of value that is missed in this journey. And implementation of data governance really is to manage who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed within your organization, and in the software development lifecycle, acceptance of governance as an integral part and vertical of your evaluation brings a lot of value, because later on, when you have your retrospectives, you really can narrow down on why you chose a certain piece of technology in your organization, and what were the compelling reasons, and who were accountable, responsible, informed, and consulted. And yeah, operationalizing data governance is easier if you have schemas in place, if you have procedures in place, if you have a policy in place. And to talk about what happens after you implement data governance, I'm just going to hand it over to Morgan.
Actually, I'll take this one. But yeah, thanks for that, Abby. And I think one of the things that I would add to that, just before we talk a little bit about post-implementation, because that's come up this is something that's come up with different groups. We want to make sure that people recognize that the names that we've given in those that RACI matrix, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not the name. Those are just semantics, right? So a business data owner or a data governance lead, what's important is really that you have someone responsible and accountable, for these different actions. And so what you call them in your organization is up to you. Don't get hung up on that. But it's just, this is again, a guideline of things to consider from a business perspective, a technical perspective, a data governance lead. But it's the roles that are really, it's the responsibilities, the descriptions that are important. And you'll see that in the policy. Okay, so now we're ready for post-implementation. So post-implementation. So I love that Morgan put that. Pat yourself on the back. Job done, but not really. And so, we've talked about this a couple of times now, and, data governance it's a lifelong thing. It's going to go on forever. It's not going to be as big, at the end as it is up front, but up front, there is a lot of work. So don't kid yourself. The writing policies, identifying the people, coming up, working closely with the people who are developing the data strategy roadmap, working with your business partners, the business plan, and understand that's a lot of work involved. So you have to be ready to take that on and to lead that. One of the big things, when you're looking for the right person also to fulfill in that role, is someone who is going to be very comfortable with talking with anyone in the organization. So I've been referred to as a Walmart greeter because I know everyone, but that's what data governance is, right? It's like you say hello to everybody, but you need to be able to do that. You need to make sure that the person who's going to be responsible has a data background, has business background, is comfortable with a communications plan and is good at executing it. And because once you get the momentum, once people are starting to get excited, and they will, as much as Morgan says data governance is boring, it's not, it's wonderful. And once you get that momentum and you get, people will get excited and they'll start seeing what the successes are and incorporate everyone in data governance. So, from the people who are collecting the data around your constituent to the people that are strategizing on what, the next 3 years are going to look like. Each one of those people have a role to play in data governance. So when you have those communications plan and you're talking to the folks and you go into team meetings, understand what their role is, because it'll give you two things. You'll be able to talk in a language that they understand, and then you'll be able to identify what are the gaps and the hurdles that they're going over that maybe you need to bring back and work on and add to your roadmap. So that's really important. And that's what data governance policy helps with, because it identifies what those needs are and it helps you to build that roadmap. And so post implementation, it's always going back and reviewing, because we all know the landscape changes all the time. Technology changes at a rate that's so hard to keep up with. So, one day, years ago, it was all about warehousing, relational databases, right? And then it was lakes. Oh, now it's cloud. It's like, so you have to keep up with that. And every time you do that comes around, it's a new iteration of your data governance review, right? Like it's it's something that you have to keep alive and you have to keep moving with it. So it's a lot of work up front, and over time, it'll, become more of a business as usual. But put that plan together and take the time. If you take that time to do it right, it'll run fairly smoothly. I would never say smooth, but fairly smoothly for sure. I think Morgan is going to talk a little bit about some of the resources, and then we'll give you a bit of a sneak peek at the details around the toolkit itself.
Thanks, Mitch. And data governance is extremely interesting. How I would never say such a thing, but it is. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the resources, because the toolkit, the data governance toolkit, and the data governance policy template itself has exactly what we talked about, all of those guidelines. But it is a bit daunting to also start from scratch when we're talking about a lot of these things of, well, what does a stakeholder matrix look like? What does a comms plan look like? So we did a lot of research and a lot of work in providing as many templates, so actual documents that you can download, make your own, but also questions, things to think about, because if we weren't able to give you an actual template, we dug deep and really found, questions to ask yourselves in order to start thinking particularly about like the framework, as well as the roadmap. But we also, took some templates and some examples outside. For example, when we talk about data quality standards, those are so varied, but we've took a few examples that you can then, again, so that you don't have to start from a blank page of just, well, where do I even start? You'll find examples, templates, questions for each of these sections of the toolkit to help you through them. So like I mentioned, the stakeholder matrix, we have a template for that, a specific template. We also have a glossary of terms for data governance policies. So, to get familiar with the jargon and the acronyms, we all love acronyms in the nonprofit sector for sure. We also included all the literary review that we did. So that was to Abby's, section in the beginning. So that's all there as well. So you can go back and look at that as well. There were a lot of great resources from Oxfam when it came to data rights and, talking about data quality as well. The RACI, so the RACI that Abby presented, that was developed by the working group themselves from that literary review that we did. So definitely, like Mitch mentioned, the titles are for you to change as you see fit, but it's a guideline to help you start thinking in in those specific ways. There's also a communications plan in there, a template for you to take and make your own. There's some really good resources about data literacy as well, and such. And the last bit is, we do have a repository of all these data governance policies, and so we would like more and more of those to be shared, because we didn't find a lot in the beginning, which is why we developed this toolkit, because there aren't a lot of data governance policies for nonprofits out there, to be honest. And so having a repository for people to be able to look through and get ideas and, being able to share and continue to develop and make data governance more and more robust across the sector is really also what we're ultimately trying to do. So I guess we're going to move over to actually showing you around and showing you the template and the toolkit. So let me quickly zoom out. And
I know, Morgan, you actually do think this is very exciting. I was
the best.
So yeah, let's just take a look at what the organization will share with all of you. So this is the data governance policy template, and so what we did is we talked about this a couple of times now. So we've gone through. We looked at all the few existing ones that were out there. And we went through, I think the data management book of knowledge, I really have to, you think I'd have shares in that, the way I talk about it all the time, but I just love it. It's just such a great resource. There's some other books as well out there that we looked at. And Abby's great work helped us to pull together those common terms and words so that we could create this template for you. And as you go through it, you'll see that what we've done is we've put a comment. So this is where you might put your paragraph of what type of wording you're going to want to include in there. And then listing, in this particular case, what does your scope look like? So what's in scope, not scope. And we put some examples for you to consider, because sometimes that we actually found it difficult. I've written a few of these policies and Abby and I were sitting there going, oh, but what would we actually put in there? And it's different for not-for-profit, right? Again, there's a lot of stuff out there for, if you were to look online, you'd find a lot of stuff for industries like banking and government and universities, and so the wording is different and their needs are different. So throughout this, what we thought about the non-for-profits, we put some of the things that really are common, doesn't matter what industry you're into, and then we created this template that you should be able to just kind of take home and update with the needs of your organization. Yeah, and so that's, so there again, we have the descriptions and stuff like that, like Morgan had talked about. So I think the other piece then that we wanted to just walk through is just show you what the actual toolkit itself looks like. And so this is very much what we just went through, actually, the presentation itself. So as we talk about the foundation, laying the foundation, what does that look like? What does that mean? The journey that got us here, writing the data governance policy, and then again, very similar to what you see in the policy, but also in the presentation. And I think that you could actually take this back and create your own presentation within your own organization to help you with that data governance planning. Like if you still needed to, convince your stakeholders, you should be able to kind of grab some of this information to help with your development of your data strategy and to talk about what do we need to do to implement a data governance program at your organization. So that's what this data governance toolkit is. And it's got lots of great links and resources. Abby and I and Morgan wanted to make sure that we shared everything that we found with all of you, because we did a lot of the homework for you, but I would say go out there and find other examples. It can be a bit daunting, and we were doing it out of it was a side, what do they call it, side, I'm terrible with expressions, the side of the desk, whatever. Kind of work. So, and a few weekends here and there, but this is what we found. So, I know I'm going to probably jump and talk a little bit about what Morgan's going to say, but if anybody finds any other examples, or if you start implementing any of this stuff, like please share it with us and let us know, how can we improve this? Like, what can we do? This is our first time out with it. And we're really excited to share it with everyone. And we really hope that this is something that you can take back with you and use.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was scrolling, through, you saw that each section has a specific example or a link to something that you can use. So you're really, we, like you said, Mitch, we did the homework for you. And so you won't be left in a section with nothing to look at or go to or use or have an example of. So you're never going to be in a dead end, basically, and we leave you on your own. We're really trying to accompany you every step of the way.
Exactly.
And then let me just go here. So yeah, the next step, yeah. So Mitch, you mentioned part of this. So yeah, the next steps here. This is the first time we've published this toolkit. So it is our first run at this. So any kind of feedback that you have, we would greatly appreciate it, because and we've said this a few times before, and I'm going to say it again. We didn't find a lot of examples out there, and so having more examples and more feedback will help make this more robust. And very much like we've been discussing since the beginning, we want, we will be looking at this again. We'll be updating this toolkit and the policy as we go through, as organizations, implement it themselves, give us feedback. We're going to keep updating it so that it becomes more and more robust. And we hope also to establish best practices and learn from each other. That's also really the idea. That's what NetHope really is about, as well as organizations coming together and figuring out how best to do this together, and data governance is one of them, because we talked about this before. Organizations are along the spectrum of the data governance journey in different places, and we've learned different things, good things, bad things, everything in between, but sharing them with others so that we create this best practice, and we have a very robust toolkit that anybody can take and implement within an organization for nonprofits is really the goal. So there is a feedback form, which is available here. It's also available in the toolkit itself. So please feel free to write to us and tell us what you thought, and we can just keep making this more and more interesting and useful and valuable to the organization, to the sector at wide. So thank you. We can move in, I think, now to the questions. I believe there were a few along the way. Let me just stop sharing so I can see. So I think, hang on, there we go. Do you see, so there was a question from Mark. Mitch, do you see that one?
Yeah. So it's, you were asking about, I'm just gonna slide back up to that. So where do we see data governance and hierarchy of regulations? Would it be data governance, master data management, data dictionary, or would there be other governance policies that need to be included? So I would say, I guess, to answer the first part of the question. So, you start with data governance, the master data management. I'll be honest, and both. So my experience outside of non-for-profit and for-profit, that's a tough one, because you're starting to try to identify, like, what is your master data, and I think that's a project really on its own. However, some of the work that you do in data governance, so such as data cataloging, identifying your critical data elements, which would then identify your constituents, and that will start to help develop that master data management work. So, but that's huge. Master data management is very huge. So I don't know that I can really answer that question, but I think, with the data governance policy, you'll have a section in there that, that is something that you would want to consider as developing in master data management. Data dictionary, I've done that all along the way. So, and the sooner you can start with that, the better. And you can have your technical dictionary, you can have your business dictionary, but if you don't have one, just start it. It doesn't matter what tool, what you're using, but just start putting it out there, start collecting that information, because that is really going to help with your data literacy program in general. And also start to identify what the needs are in terms of trust in your data. Because if you don't have a data dictionary, whether it's on the business side or IT or both, if people don't understand what that data element means or how that derivation occurred, that's just going to cause misuse of data down the road. So start it. And I can't recommend a tool. I have not, again, in nonprofit, it's much more difficult because tools for data dictionaries are very expensive. So really depends, and we're not here to suggest any tool. So really I want to keep that as tool agnostic, but if you have something there, use it. If not, you know what, just I'm going to say it, use Excel. Like on us if you just start. I hope that that's helped that part. There was also a second part to the question about what other governance policies that need to be included. So in the data governance policy, you'll actually see that. So it'll suggest which ones are policies, which are standards and guidelines. And so if you think about, gosh, and I forget now what the name of the format is, but really, you start with the policy and then you go down to standards, guidelines, and procedures. And you'll find some things are just really standards and guidelines and not policies. So you'll find that in the template, there'll be some suggestions there.
And it also depends on the organization's operating model. It's how you layer your data governance policy is heavily dependent on your organization's operating model. So if a federated organization is trying to implement data governance, then there are a diverse set of stakeholders versus a conventional top-down approach. So I think if you invest some time in also trying to identify how decisions are being taken and decimated within your organization, there's a good chance you're able to layer your data governance policy.
Yeah, thanks for that. The next question is, what is the difference between business data owner and technical data owner? So it really depends, again, on the type of organization that you have, how large and big, but there has to be some accountability on both sides around the data. So generally your technical data owner, again, it's a bit of a semantic there. It's really the people in IT that are responsible and accountable for implementing the tools and technology to keep the data secure, to, if possible, know the lineage. So lineage doesn't have to be documented again, but it's great if you can document it. But they have to be responsible to know where that data is going and that you have the right security behind it. So that's from the technology side. And it's pretty basic, but it can go bigger than that. On the business side, you also have to have accountability for the sharing and the usage and the storage of data on the business side, because if the business doesn't take accountability for their teams to enter the data correctly, to have the training that they need to enter the data and capture the data correctly, then you're just going to end up, right, garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to be able to use it. So that's what we talk about when we talk about a business data owner versus a technical data owner. So again, you can call that business data owner what you want, and it becomes really around stewardship of the data. But someone on the business side needs to have that accountability, and I strongly recommend that mandates be updated to include that accountability and the responsibility on the business side that they will help to steward that data, because that's where it also starts. So I hope that helps. You can tell I'm pretty adamant about that. I was a data steward as well, so.
I think there was a question also for maybe Abby about the, do you recommend using the DMBOK as a resource, or is it baked into this toolkit?
DMBOK is a fabulous resource. There's also enterprise architecture frameworks like TOGAF and Archimate 3.0 that also gives you a clear viewpoint on how to enforce governance within the technology stack. So within enterprise architecture, there is a good chunk of knowledge in TOGAF and Archimate 3.0. And this information is also available on how to, so if you have an enterprise architecture framework within your organization, and if you want to follow an enterprise architecture standard, the data governance standards from these frameworks are just as robust. So DMBOK is great, Archimate is great, TOGAF is great, and it's really about having that function in your organization so that you start to bring it into your stewards' everyday activity.
Yeah, and I think it was back to the earlier point we made where we do talk about technology and data architecture, but we keep it quite broad. And I think it was your point, Abby, of because it really depends on your organization. We didn't want to go down a specific road because you might have an enterprise architect, you might not, you might have something. So we did put the resources there, and we do talk about the importance of having data architecture, but we didn't specify, this one's the best. We put examples like you're saying, Abby, but specifically because we didn't want to, yeah, each organization will have its own way of doing things. So we kept it as resource heavy as possible, giving you the links to the places you can get the frameworks, but not going down that specific road. Yeah.
I think the next question is around where does data governance, overall data governance sit? That's like the big debates. So I would not recommend legal. It doesn't sit there. That's the one thing I could say. Whether it's on business or IT, you can have arguments for both. That's why, in very large organizations, they have a chief data office. It kind of sits separate from everybody else. And so I can only talk to the two organizations that I'm in. Both I've been on the IT side, so I roll up into IT. I don't think that's a bad thing, but not that you want a dotted line, but you have to be very close to the business as well. And that's where the communication comes in. So, does it sit in one or the other? I don't know that there's a huge preference, but I think the key thing is don't lose sight that you need to be very close to the business and IT at all times. So,
and also maybe an example of a very traditional top-down approach, then it's everything that is governance related has always sitting on the legal side. So legal is always in parallel with the decision making. And again, the operating model of the organization plays a very important role on where governance sits in. So if you're an organization where everything is relatively top-down, then there is a good chance that governance and data governance and policy making with data governance is also shifted to that vertical, because maybe the data artifacts that you generate has a huge impact and requires a lot of scrutiny. So it goes down to the operating model of the organization, and if your operating model is very lean, then it can sit with the business. And I think in the data governance policy template, we had used a clear verbiage that this is always in close consultation with the legal team. So anything that is churned out will be in close consultation with the legal team, and they have to kind of sign off that yes, this is in the context of how we deliver policies.
Absolutely, because if I think about GDPR, which was a great example, right, of, so I was not in non-for-profit when GDPR came out, and because I live in Canada, and worked in Canada for a Canadian organization, we didn't have the GDPR scrutiny that some of our other partners had. However, any policy that we created, as soon as it talked about data privacy and retention, we referred to GDPR, and we went back to our legal partners, and they gave us the guidance that we needed. And you're absolutely right. Like even today, we highly recommend that you may have a data governance council or whatever group you want to call that group, that's made up of your data stewards from the different organizations, your architect, whatever. You always are going to have to send your policy out to have legal review it, because it's a policy after all. And so what you're putting there is you're basically telling people what you can and cannot do with the data. And so legal has to come in and review that for sure. So, it's, you don't sit it necessarily in policy. I've not experienced that, but either way, your legal arm is there at all times. Yeah. Just looking to see if there's any other questions.
So there was, do you see any value for nonprofits partnering with organizations such as the EDM Council?
I love the EDM Council. I've been a member in my past, one of my past roles, and actually, so here I talked all about being in Canada and not having GDPR requirements. Well, guess what? I was one of the co-authors of the white paper on GDPR. So just what types of considerations, but it was great because you had US, Canada, and European countries involved, but if you're able to get into the EDM Council, I highly recommend it. They're fantastic. They're really good. Yeah.
And I think because we're coming up on the hour, the last question is, are there any examples available for a data dictionary or for data dictionaries?
I can probably take that. Yeah, Microsoft Technologies, they have Azure Purview as a standard functionality that is being rolled out. But like Mitch and Morgan rightly said, we're not here to endorse any technology. So if you're already implementing data lakes or data warehousing or something, the product that you implement, your data warehouses, it should have something. If not, just start with Excel and then work your way up.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's one question that just came in, which is quite long, actually. We do have only 2 minutes left, so we struggle with data quality a lot. How to make sure that users enter data correctly or even enter information at all? Would you recommend developing a data governance framework for a new system that the organization is implementing? Do you have any experience? Sorry, just finishing the full, sorry. Do you have any experience when this would be driven by the business side, or should it be driven by a product owner or the organization itself?
So I'd say the product owner would be a great way to start. And what I would also do is include a business partner as part of your data governance council. And we do have experience in that. And what I would recommend is so I'm trying to talk to it real fast, but so not so much data quality policy, but at least data quality standards and guidelines that you develop with the business, and that you put in controls and metrics and measures on verifying the data quality. So run queries. So it's data profiling, right? So, and you don't have to have a tool to do that. You could run queries, but if you have a tool, it's always better. But it's not just about the IOs to make sure that, it's in the right format, but it's also the spot checking. So you need someone to do some spot checks and then work with the business to identify two things. One, is it, one inputter who's just constantly putting something in? Or is it maybe a technology problem that maybe you don't have lists and people are putting in free format? So it's the experience has been to, as part of data governance, have a good data quality strong arm on the side of that. And I would strongly recommend that if resources are available, to develop a set of standards and policies and processes and concentrate on that. If you can, assign someone to work on data quality at all times, because that does become very labor intensive, but the benefits of it are incredible. And usually a lot of data governance programs are started because of the quality of the data is questionable.
Great. Well, that brings us to the hour. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Abby. I might hand it over to Madeline for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Morgan. Thank you to our speakers, Mitch, Abby, and Morgan. What a great presentation. We had a great attendee list here today and very engaged. So thanks to the attendees for taking your hour and spending it with us. And we will follow up. I saw that there were several questions in the chat about the resources and how do we get access to them. And we will follow up with all of you with an email that will include resources, links to those resources. So stay tuned. Do take a moment, please, to provide your feedback on this session. We appreciate your feedback and it informs the rest of our webinar series. So thank you for any feedback you have to offer. And again, I'll say thank you for all the hard work on this data governance toolkit to Mitch, Abby, and Morgan. It was an awesome presentation and lots of hard work. So thank you very much. And thanks to everyone today for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.